So we finally got the Incognito crank pulley in. Waited about a month for it. We got a 19 Charger Hellcat here. We're gonna do the installation on for you guys today so you can get a better idea to do it at home by yourself. The kit actually does come with the instructions. They're saying it takes about 2 hours worth of time to install it, but they printed out the instructions so we'll be able to go step by step. What's included in this kit is we have the Gates supercharger belt, or accessory belt that they came with. So we got the new accessory, the new Gates supercharger belt. We got the 3 bolts here, and this is for the actual crank. These are gonna go in here against the factory crank pulley. We got our spacer here for the belt tensioner. I believe this is for the accessory drive belt tension for it that's necessary in the kit. We have here our piece, it's our lockout piece for the flywheel. It's going to lock against the flywheel so we can remove the main bolt for our crankshaft pulley. And then we have a factory crank bolt for a Hellcat. All right, and just real quick, let you guys know how light this thing actually is. It's ridiculous. It feels like paperweight. So we'll go ahead and get started on the installation. All right, so first step is we're going to come down here and remove these bolts. All right, so that's 4 bolts, and that takes care of this back pan. It's just for the oil change to get to the drain plug. So we're going to continue taking off this front pan, which looks like 8mm bolts, and to get this front off so we can gain some access to that pulley up there. Just make sure there's nothing else on the side. We got these side clips, as well as those front 8mm bolts that we have to do to get this front shield out. Let's go ahead and do that. So it's holding the front splash guard on. We have 8 of these 8mm bolts, and then we have looks like 9 of these push pins that you have to get out, 3 in the middle and 3 on each side, total of 9. All right, so here, so you can see how much clearance you have under here to get to that crank pulley. All right, let's check out our next step. Okay, so once you have the splash guards removed underneath the vehicle to have more access under there, the next step is you're going to go disconnect the negative side of the battery. On the Dodges, it's located in the trunk. And then we'll go ahead and take the air intake assembly off and then get to the drive belt tensioner and remove both of the accessory and the supercharger belts. All right, so we're going to disconnect the battery negative side, 10mm ratchet here. Just go ahead and remove that. You want to set this in a safe place as well. You don't want to let it arc while we're working on the car, so I'll probably grab a microfiber towel and just put it in between the terminal. Okay, so the next step is to do this intake. We have to just remove this air intake box out of the way to gain more access down there for the supercharger belt and to do what we have to do. So we'll start easy here. Right here there's a clip for this is the intake air temperature sensor. You just simply press this and pull up. We'll just move this out of the way. Now on this air intake box right here, I noticed this hose going in here. It actually does not look like it's a removable item. For some reason it seems like it's really stuck in there. So you follow back here, the same thing, it's another hard line, there's no disconnect here. The only disconnect I recognize right here is with this push clip. So I can see how this hose, look at that, very simply just comes right off. So what we'll do is we'll remove this canister with the air intake as an assembly, just to prevent disconnecting extra stuff. So we'll go ahead and you just push this clip back, like so, push down and pull out. That little clear clip is a safety clip so this doesn't come off. Move that out of the way. It looks like 10mm, 10mm, 10mm. And we can remove this little purge valve looking thing out of the way. All right, we got the 8mm right down here. Actually guys, I want to correct myself real quick. It was 7mm down here on the bottom. For this bottom tray, there's 7mm bolts that hold it on. So here's 8mm, and we're going to be taking apart this air intake system. Point out real quick, we got 1, 2, 3 bolts holding this piece on, and we got 2 of the clamps here holding it onto the throttle body assembly. So we got the air intake out of the way. The boots seem to be stuck on there a little bit, just probably due to the heat. But got the air filter out, got the boot out of the way, move that valve with it. So you can see right here, it's all together with the air intake system, and we'll just install it just like that back together. So now they were mentioning to get this accessory drive belt off. Very simple. I mean, you're gonna have the same amount of space you do here. You take a 3/8 ratchet. This is a snap-on one, so it's a little bit longer. You get more leverage, and you stick it in the bottom right here in the tensioner. and simply pull to the right, which would be to the driver's side of the vehicle, to remove tension. This tensioner is pretty tough. I've done a lot of tensioners over the years, and this one definitely, I mean, one being brand new, but two being for a bigger motor. Tensioner is pretty tough, so make sure you get a lot of leverage. If you had to, you could put a jack handle or a pipe on the end of the ratchet so you can get more leverage, but simply pull towards the driver's side and you'll be able to get that accessory drive belt out. The accessory drive belt did go behind this tensioner, so you do have to play with the belt a little bit to get it out, but you can get the belt out completely without removing this tensioner. We're gonna go ahead and remove the supercharger belt. It's gonna be a 15mm wrench you can use. I got this guy, it actually works perfect. Just an extended long wrench, ratcheting too. And go ahead and pull towards the throttle body to the right, and that'll remove the tension on the supercharger belt, give you access to taking it off, because we already got the accessory drive belt out of the way. I found out the best way to get this supercharger belt off: have someone on the top moving this all the way, maxing out towards the throttle body, and take it off from the bottom, from the crankshaft on the bottom. Once you take it off there, you'll be able to get back up here and snake it out of there. Okay, for this step, which is supposed to be step 8, you got to take out the two 10mm bolts holding the fan shroud. So we have one right here in this corner, right there, one 10mm there. And we also have one 10mm right underneath this upper radiator hose. Go ahead and move it out of the way down there, and you'll be able to see the 10mm. It's proportional to the other side. There's another 10mm right under there in that circular housing. So that plug right there, which is the connector for the fan, that's the one that I went ahead and unplugged and got out of the way. And that connector out of the way gives you access to getting that 10mm bolt out. Next step, underneath the vehicle, underneath the fan shroud, you're going to see this metal hard line, and that hard line's for the intercooler. It's saying that coolant's going through it, so what we have to do is drain the coolant out of the vehicle. If you follow the hard line, it goes up here to where you see a clamp that we're able to remove, and by taking that clamp out, we'll be able to drop this whole hard line out of the way, in turn giving us more room to get this fan shroud out, which I believe is coming out from the bottom. So we have a clamp on this side, clamp on that side, and these two safety clips that are holding the hard line underneath the vehicle. So we got the hard line off here. There's the hard line just simply moved over. I left that clamp on for now just to see if I can prevent from me taking it off and getting this out of the way. I just simply pushed it out of the way, still draining off into the bucket. Got the 10mm bolts on both sides for the fan shroud already taken off, so we're going to be able to work down here now to get this fan shroud out. I want to mention to you the end of this where the hose goes on was pretty much welded on there. I could have swore they used some kind of thread sealer on it, because I was sticking a screwdriver in there and finally was able to wiggle it off. You know, I used the trick where you move the clamp around, you know, or you move the hose around to try to break it loose before, and it literally was just welded on there, but was able to get it off without damaging the hose, which is good. So like I said, on to now we're going to remove this fan shroud. So before we remove this fan shroud, we're back down here underneath the car. There's a 10mm bolt holding this optional power steering line. Some of these apparently have it, some of them don't, but this one has the power steering line. So the 10mm just sits on top of the frame rail, the subframe rail. I was able to use a small 10mm ratcheting wrench to get up there through here and simply remove that bolt. So now we're able to push this line farther back, so give us more access to removing this fan shroud. Hey guys, we got our thread sealer on these 3 bolts. They're 6mm Allen heads, and they're gonna go on the crank pulley down there. The crank pulley very simply just slides out of the way. The last step that we had to do was drop that fan shroud halfway down to get just enough clearance for that front pulley. Do not drop the fan shroud all the way out of the vehicle, because it's gonna make it that much harder to get it back up. Through my experience, I'm gonna say that technically the radiator fan shroud by the book comes out the top by removing the thermostat housing and the upper hose, but they just wanted to take less time because they're saying it's a total hour of 2 hours, 2-hour install time. They want to take less time so they don't open the cooling system for the engine, just for the supercharger intercooler. So right now we got the 2 bolts in there. We're ready to put the 3rd one in with the Loctite, and then we'll go ahead and torque them down to 40 foot-pounds. Guys, so we have our snap-on torque wrench here set to 40 foot-pounds, and we got the 6mm Allen head on the end. I'm gonna go down there and just go ahead and torque them to 40. We'll do each bolt a little bit at a time. You don't want to do one all the way at 40 and then go to the other ones. You just want to get them all snugged at the same time. And so we got our torque wrench down there. We're on our last bolt. Go ahead and hit it. And there it is. It's 40. So now each one of these are torqued to 40 foot-pounds. And we'll go ahead to the next step. So now we got the crank sleeve put on. We got the bolts torqued to 40 foot-pounds. We got the crank bolt down there at 248 foot-pounds torqued. Was a recommendation to install the supercharger belt at the same time as the pulley on the bottom, just because there's small clearance. So we went ahead and did that as well. Next step, I took out the lockout tool and I went ahead and I put the transmission inspection cover back on, just so we're done with that underneath. And now it's going to be installing the spacer on the accessory drive belt tensioner. Hey guys, so we got the belt back on for the supercharger. Really wasn't that hard. Start with putting it around the crankshaft down there, and you can work it around up here, and I'll do it from the top. You don't have to get on the bottom for the supercharger belt. Once I got that out of the way, the next step was to install the accessory drive belt. I was able to get that on. Plenty of room right here. One of the tips I guess I could say is when you're going to put the belt back on, go ahead and use this pulley right here to put the belt back on. Like in other words, this will be the last pulley that you put the belt on. Go ahead and relieve tension off the tensioner and then slip the belt onto this pulley right there, and everything's good, all back on. So now the next step, we'll go ahead and put this radiator fan back up in the vehicle and make sure that that's all snugged up. All right, so now we got the hard line back in. Well, actually we started with the fan shroud. The fan shroud's back in. We just got to put the 10mm bolts on the top. The fan shroud, they're definitely right. Do not drop this all the way out of the car, or it makes it that much harder to do from the bottom. Like I said earlier, it's probably the right way to do it is to take it out the top, but it is possible from the bottom. So we got the 10mm bolt back in that power steering line, held on the frame rail. We got these clips back into this hard line, put the hose back on with the clamp. I want to mention to you guys, I was able to do this job without removing this other side of the intercooler line that holds the coolant. They wanted you to remove the entire line. I left that clamp on there and simply just swung it out of the way towards the back of the car to give me access to drop this radiator fan. So that's all back in, got the belts back on. Let's keep going. Okay, so the splash guards back in. We had the bolts in the front, the little 7mm all across the front, and then we had the 2 in the back, and we re-secured these clips back up here in the corner, so the bottom should be taken care of and done down here. All right, we got it fired up. Initially we went ahead, topped off the coolant. We have a I/C coolant level low light, which is coming from the intercooler level, coolant level, because you have the intercooler reservoir and the engine reservoir. We did not open the engine reservoir, so we shouldn't have to bleed the engine's cooling system, but it is a part of the engine's cooling system, so we're just bleeding this right now. They said it'll help in the back here. You'll see a bleeder valve, and that little pink valve is the bleeder for the top of the supercharger, and that's how they're telling us to bleed it. So we're going to warm it up, get it under some pressure, because we already ran it with the cap off. And once it's under pressure, we'll crack that bleeder open and see how much air we can get out of it.